All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce Canada Forum for the riding of Waterloo. Thank you very much for each of you for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedules. The format for this event will be 1 minute introductory remarks from each candidate, followed by questions and priority areas identified by the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce through their advisory committees and responses from the membership at large. The questions will be asked in rotation, and the moderator reserves the right to terminate answers where appropriate. At the conclusion of the debate, each candidate will be allowed 1 minute for closing remarks, which will proceed in reverse order from opening remarks. We'll now commence with 60-second opening remarks. The candidate order, as determined alphabetically by surname, is Jonathan Castles from the NDP, Bardish Chager from the Liberal Party, Megan Shannon from the Conservative Party, and Carla Villa-Gomez Fajardo from the Green Party of Canada. Bardish Chager will answer the first question, and the previous rotation will continue. Concluding remarks will be in reverse order. We'll start the debate with Jonathan Castles for opening remarks. Jonathan?
Well, thank you, James. Hi, my name is Jonathan Castles. I am a financial professional with nearly a decade's experience in the industry. I'm also a national activist and organizer who's worked on election reform and Pharmacare, and I'm a local dad. Today, I dropped off my son for his second day ever of kindergarten, and my wife and I are also expecting our second child just in the next few weeks. I'm running to be your member of parliament because life has just become too expensive for too many people in Waterloo. Whether that's the cost of housing, to rent, or to own, for prescription medications and to other healthcare, the burden of debt that people have been forced to take on, or the looming cost of climate change. We have a government that has talked a lot about solving these issues, but hasn't delivered despite lots of opportunity. Waterloo should be represented by someone who is determined to solve these issues, because the status quo isn't working for the people of Waterloo, and I will. Thank you. I'm Jonathan Castles, your NDP candidate.
Thank you, Jonathan. Now we'll go to Bardish Chager from the Liberal Party.
Hi, I'm Bardish Chager, your Liberal candidate. I am proud to have served as your Member of Parliament since 2015. Over the past 6 years, our Liberal government has delivered, even in the face of the worst health crisis in a century. We acted quickly and decisively to put necessary supports in place. We've worked closely with provinces, the private sector, and civil society to face this crisis head on. We created programs to protect Canadians and save jobs. Canadians kept their homes. Many businesses weathered the storm. Canadians rose to the occasion. Today, we have a higher proportion of our population fully vaccinated than any other G7 country. We're rebuilding our vaccine research and manufacturing capability. We've maintained one of the best fiscal positions in the G7. We've made great strides in the environment. Families are better off, yet we have more to do. This battle isn't over, and we need a plan for the future. The Liberal Party has that plan, a fully costed plan for our economy, our environment, for families. It's a plan for fairness, equity, and reconciliation. I look forward to our time together and sharing some of the progress we have made and how we move forward for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Megan Shannon from the Conservative Party. Megan, I think you're still on mute there.
Sorry about that. Hi, thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you to the KW Chamber of Commerce for hosting this forum, and thank you to the people who've tuned in. It's a pleasure to be joined by other Waterloo candidates from all parties. My name is Megan Shannon. I'm the Conservative candidate for Waterloo. I've lived in the region for over 20 years. I did my PhD in geography at the University of Waterloo. I'm a former manager of a youth shelter in downtown Kitchener. I served at-risk youth. In the last couple of years, I've been working provincially in public policy, in Indigenous affairs, energy, and natural resources and forestry. This election will be a choice between a comprehensive Conservative plan that will deliver on commitments to deliver good jobs for Canadians, address the housing crisis, lead us through recovery, and restore public finances, versus more of the same. Candidates can serve as the only alternative to secure the future for all of us, to restore competency, transparency, accountability to government, and to ensure that Canada is prepared for future crisis. I know many of you did not want this election, but we have a choice ahead of us. We can choose to help get Canada back on track, on its feet, and build our economy back. With the Conservatives, you will get Canada's recovery plan to secure jobs, health, the environment, and Canada's economic future.
Thank you, Megan. And now to Carla Villa-Gomez-Fajardo from the Green Party.
Awesome, thank you for that. I'd like to thank the KW Chamber of Commerce for holding this event, as well as James, you, the moderator, for participating in this. So I am the Green Party candidate. My name is Carla Villa-Gomez-Fajardo. I'm running in this election because time and time again, I have seen Canadian politics. It doesn't really seem to be working for regular Canadian citizens. In my time here at Waterloo, I've been an active member of the community. I have worked with diverse groups such as at my school, we have a group called ABS, which is Association for Black Students, as well as the LGBTQ+ Rainbow Center, as well as I sit on the Student Advisory Committee for gender-based violence. So I've been pretty involved in my community, and I know firsthand the issues concerning these underrepresented groups. In a time like this, we have climate change is completely of the essence. We haven't really been doing enough, and we need to take strong actions to address this climate crisis once and for all, as well as ensure that we have affordable housing for our citizens here in Waterloo. It's becoming less and less attainable for regular folks. And as somebody who at some point in my life wants to get into the housing market, that's something that concerns me. I want to make sure that I can secure, a solid future for myself. My goal with running in this election is to bring back an honest and trustworthy voice to Ottawa. So I'm Carla Villa-Gomez, and I'm the Green Party candidate.
Thank you. First question we'll proceed with is, what is the priority local issue for the residents of the riding where you are seeking election in September of 2021? And with the first response, we'll go with Bardish Chagger.
Thank you so much, James, for that question. So me and my team actually have been knocking on a lot of doors. We have been making lots of phone calls, responding to emails, and having important conversations. What I'm hearing at the doors is that Canadians want to beat this pandemic. We want to see us actually make sure that the health and safety of Canadians remains a priority, but that we also have measures into place, including vaccine procurement, which our government has the most diversified vaccine portfolio. And today we see more Canadians vaccinated, fully vaccinated, and our numbers are actually greater than any other G7 country. We see that Canadians want to get back to work. They have appreciated the measures that we have put into place, including, securing jobs through the wage subsidy, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, a support grant for students to make sure that they also have some supports during this time. But they also want to see us focus on the environment. And that's why we have a comprehensive plan to not only build upon the work we're doing, including a price on pollution that is accompanied by the climate action incentive, but to ensure that we are protecting the environment for future generations. They want to see us actually be in the housing space, and the federal government returned to the housing space in 2015 when we took office. And they also want to see us work on reconciliation. And our government believes in a true nation-to-nation relationship, Indigenous-led, where the government actually listens to what Indigenous communities are asking for, rather than the Ottawa knows best mentality. The last comment I'll make, James, before you cut me off, I'm not sure if we have a minute or how much, is really that Canadians want us to make our decisions based on the evidence and science available. And that's why we have restored funding to the Chief Science Advisor. We have invested in research, but Canadians do not want decisions based on ideology. And me, with my background from the University of Waterloo, a Bachelor of Science, I will always ensure that our decisions are made based on evidence and science. There's a lot more that Canadians are talking about. This is definitely not a one-issue election, but we need a plan for the future, and the Liberals have that plan, and Canadians, they deserve to get to choose how we get there.
Thank you. With the same question to Megan Shannon, what is a priority local issue for the residents of the riding where you're seeking election?
So in the last 2 months, my team and I have knocked on almost 20,000 doors. I've heard of many priority issues, and if I had to pick a couple of them, I would say the housing crisis and affordability, seniors, more supports for seniors with disabilities, and economic recovery for small businesses. In terms of affordability, the cost of living is going up, grocery bills are up 5%, and the gas prices have skyrocketed. Inflation is at the highest level that it has been in 20 years and rising. Conservatives have a plan to get the spending under control and to lower the cost of living for Canadians. For example, we would lower food prices by increasing the maximum fine for price fixing from 24 million to 100 million, introducing criminal penalties, including jail time for executives convicted of price fixing. We would also require transparency for investment management fees so that seniors and savers don't get ripped off, including requiring the banks to show investment returns on net fees. In terms of housing, the Conservative Party would bring down the cost of housing by stopping the inflationary impacts of foreign buyers and speculation in the housing market. We will ensure that housing in Canada is truly for Canadian residents first. For seniors, in terms of supporting seniors and people with disabilities, the Conservative Party has a plan to help seniors stay in their homes, improve the quality of long-term care, and maintain financial security for seniors by ensuring that their pensions are secure. For example, we would amend the home accessibility tax credit by increasing the limit from $10,000 per dwelling to $10,000 per person. We would also break down the barriers for people with disabilities. For example, we would double the disability supplement in the Canada Workers Benefit from $713 to $1,500, providing a major boost to lower income Canadians with disabilities on top of the increase in the Canada Worker Benefit. And for small businesses, Canada's Conservatives have a strong plan to get the economy back on track and to help small businesses. For example, we would launch and rebuild the Main Street and introduce a tax credit. This will provide 25% tax credit on amounts up to $100,000 that Canadians personally invest in small business over the next 2 years. We will give a strong incentive for Canadians to invest their money to help entrepreneurs rebuild this country. I'm hearing a lot of issues in Waterloo region, and these are some of the top priorities.
Thank you. We'll move on to Carla with the same question. What is the priority local issue for the residents of the riding?
So in my time, I've been lucky enough to be able to do some canvassing. Obviously, with COVID in mind, we do have to adjust accordingly, make sure that we're doing that in a safe way and that we are adapting as we need to. But in my time in doing that, I have noticed that the residents here are telling me that, housing is a huge concern. If it's not for them themselves, if they already have a home, they're concerned about their children. How are their children, going to get into the housing market? The Green Party believes that housing is a human right. We have goals to make it more affordable. We have a concrete plan. So we want to appoint a minister of housing to strengthen the national housing strategy. We want to increase the National Housing Co-Investment Fund. We can even look for solutions in the private sector, and this can look like partnerships with companies to build affordable housing units and technologies that can build houses at a reduced cost of current traditional buildings. And we really do believe that your house is a home, right? It's not just an investment. And we really do hope to strengthen regulations on foreign investments in residential real estate. We want to create an empty home tax for foreign and corporate residential property owners who have their buildings who leave their buildings vacant. We want to prioritize funding for nonprofit and cooperative housing. As well, I have heard from the folks here in Waterloo that they're concerned about how are we going to recover from this pandemic. A lot of people have suffered both physically and financially from this pandemic. Some people's jobs are at risk if they haven't already lost it. So my party looks to innovate and create a post-pandemic green economic recovery. We have the opportunity of a lifetime to invest in a post-pandemic green economic recovery. When we look at Canadian history, we find ourselves in difficult times. Say, for example, World War II, we pivoted as we needed to, and we found solutions that worked for Canadians. This can look like transitioning away from fossil fuel economies to non-renewable energy sources. And a lot of these Canadians do care about this because this is, we all share the world that we live in. We all share the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food that we eat. This is an issue that concerns every Canadian to at least some capacity. So my party hopes to address the concerns of the citizens here at Waterloo and hear what they have to say and work with municipal, federal, and local officials to make that possible for folks here in Waterloo.
Thank you, Carla. Jonathan, same question. What's a local priority issue for the residents of Waterloo?
Well, I'll talk about three sort of broad categories here. But the first one is affordability. People are concerned about whether or not they can afford to live in Waterloo and what the future looks like for them here. So part of that is housing, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about housing later, but making sure that there are enough homes for people who live here, because no amount of financial support is going to help people enough to get into a home if there aren't the homes for them to live in. Health and security is a huge thing. This pandemic has shown some huge holes in the systems that we rely on to care for one another. And we need to take steps very quickly to make sure that those holes are filled and that we're doing better moving forward. So that includes things like long-term care. Public long-term care has outperformed private long-term care for people living there. That includes things like addressing climate change and moving forward on things. I'm frankly amazed that there's two candidates in this debate who during a climate crisis thinks it's a good idea to build more pipelines. I also think growth, so recovery and growth. Waterloo has an amazing technology sector that positions us really well to be a world leader in things like healthcare, in growing the green economy, in the new infrastructure that we need. And there's some amazing opportunities here in Waterloo to make sure that we're recovering from the pandemic, but also growing moving forward and creating new opportunities for people right here in Waterloo. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the second question. First one to respond will be Megan. Do you support in principle the implementation of a proof of vaccination program for non-essential businesses? Yeah, still on mute.
Sorry, I keep on doing that. It happens all too often. Personally, I am a proponent of vaccines, and I encourage everybody who is willing and able to get vaccinated. Vaccines are an effective tool to stop the spread of COVID-19. I do also believe that Canadians have the right to make their own medical decisions. Informed consent is a principle of Canadian society. The Conservatives will require unvaccinated Canadian passengers to present a recent negative test or pass a rapid test before getting on a bus, train, plane, or ship. Similarly, we'll require federal public servants who are not vaccinated to pass a rapid daily test. In terms of vaccination passports, this is an issue of provincial jurisdiction, and the Conservative Party respects the rights of provincial governments to implement and manage their own public health guidelines.
Carla, same question for you about mandatory vaccines and the implementation of a proof of vaccination for non-essential businesses.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So my party puts health and safety as a top priority. If our folks aren't healthy and safe, then what much do we have? I think the vaccine passport in theory, is a really good initiative to ensure that people going into public spaces are keeping their peers safe and making sure that we reduce the spread of COVID-19. This being said, that when we talk about vaccine passports, we need to make sure that it's done in a way that creates social cohesion. It supports healthcare, education, small businesses, and it has to be easy to implement. When we look at vaccine passports, not everyone accesses healthcare the exact same way. This isn't a one size fits all. Say, for example, elderly folks. I have two grandparents who, don't have smartphones. They don't have access to QR codes. There are some, folks who aren't very tech savvy. There are folks in rural and remote areas who don't, participate in the health system the same way we do. And I do potentially see the divisiveness for these certificates. I do acknowledge that it is only temporary and it's not going to be a permanent measure. However, it needs to be a plan that doesn't leave anybody behind. We have to make sure that we're reaching people where they are, and we can do that by conversations with local officials and hearing from them firsthand what really needs to be done in their local ridings. So for vaccine passports, I think in theory it's good, but we just have to make sure that we're not leaving people behind in this effort.
Thank you. And Jonathan, for implementation of proof of vaccination program.
I mean, the short answer to the question is yes. We know that small businesses, business owners want to make sure that their employees and their customers are safe. And this is a tool that we can create that will enable them to do that. And it's something that it's important for us to do. I'll add that Carla just spoke really well about some of the concerns, making sure that vaccine passports are accessible, or whatever tool we end up with are accessible. And I'd add that we also need to make sure we're in a position where workers who are being asked to interface with people, to talk to people, ensure that whatever rules are in place are actually enforced, are protected as well. It's a difficult thing to make sure that we're checking, that workers are checking those things. And that's something that needs to be sort of built into the process right from the start, just along with accessibility, how that's going to work. This is important. I'll add to that as well that I think it's a little embarrassing that the government we have right now has been talking about not being able to do this for another year, that it will be next year before we actually get to this. There's other governments in the world, there's governments in Canada who've implemented things like this in a few weeks or months, going back to January. And the fact that the response we're getting on this topic from the Liberal Party's leader is that we're looking at next year before anything is in place is embarrassing and unacceptable. People deserve these tools to keep themselves and others safe.
Thank you. And we'll go to Bartage with a response to the question, and if you wanted to respond to Jonathan's question as well.
One thing I often say is, as much as the world needs more Canada, Canada needs more Waterloo. In Waterloo, we can have respectful conversations without trying to undermine. Let's be part of the solution. And that's what the residents of the riding of Waterloo and the Waterloo region do. So I'm not going to take the bait of the NDP candidate. But what I will say is that, as I mentioned in the earlier comment, and the question that was posed to me, is that Canadians do want to fight and finish the fight against COVID-19. Millions of Canadians have rolled up their sleeves and have taken the vaccine. Our health regulator, Health Canada, has demonstrated and proven, based on evidence and science, that these vaccines are safe and that Canadians can receive them. Obviously, there are uncertainties and concerns, and it's important that we work together to address those. When it comes to the federal level, I too agree that, we are a confederation in Canada and there's different levels of jurisdiction. So I would say that it's important that the federal government work with the international community, just like we are with the G7 and the World Health Organization, to ensure that our vaccine credentials are recognized in other countries. Unless you're Indigenous, everyone immigrated to Canada at some point. We want to ensure that travel is two ways, and we want to ensure that we're working with provinces and territories, which we have done well. A re-elected Liberal government will actually launch a $1 billion COVID-19 proof of vaccination fund to support provinces and territories who are implementing a requirement for proof of vaccine credentials, and will also table legislation to ensure that every business and organization that decides to require proof of vaccination from employees and customers can do so without fear of challenge. And I think that's where we want to ensure that we're part of the solution, and that's why we will continue working with all Canadians. When we say diversity is their strength, not just the shells we occupy, but the diversity of regions, of experiences, of lived realities, and the list goes on. And I will continue to be a voice that listens to all Canadians, even when we don't agree, to figure out how can we find a better way forward. Thank you, James.
Thank you. On to the next question. What is your plan to continue support to small business during the remainder of the pandemic and beyond? And would you support higher business taxes? And Carla, we'll begin with you on that answer.
So when we talk about small businesses, we see the pandemic really disproportionately affected small businesses. I think when we look at the pandemic, it's honestly just highlighted the things that are the inequalities that already existed in our society, right? When we look at the pandemic and the outcomes, who benefited from it and who really, really hurt the most. When we look at we have multinational companies such as Netflix, Airbnb, Uber. These companies have made huge profits in the pandemic. And to me, as someone who just looks at it at face value, that makes no sense to me. I know plenty of folks and students even who struggle to find jobs in the summer, who struggle to keep their jobs. So to me, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense why we have a two-tier society. We have people in the pandemic who are basically the haves and the have-nots. And unfortunately, the small business owners seem to have been the have-nots and really bared the burden of this crisis. To address this, we really do want to crack down on corporate tax evasion. We live in a rapidly growing globalized economy, and our taxes need to keep up with the times. We support taxing foreign multinational companies such as Amazon, Netflix, Airbnb, Uber, and who have you, who don't currently pay their fair share of taxes on Canadian land. They currently pay close to zero in income and corporate tax. So this burden really should not be on the backs of regular Canadians. We need to close these loopholes. We need to end offshore tax dodging and hold companies accountable and provide the CRA, the Canadian Revenue Agency, with the resources to enforce this. We also need to add some corporate tax on transnational e-commerce companies, as well as eliminate tax havens. We need a fair scale and more levels to our tax structures. Currently, we have about 3 tax brackets, and you know who that hurts the most? That hurts middle-class Canadians and middle-class citizens of Waterloo the most. We need to increase the amount of brackets we have so that burden isn't just on regular folks. So my party really does see the need for, there being an equitable society, really, because we can't have a two-tier society where people are benefiting and other people are really suffering.
Thank you, Carla. Jonathan, what is your plan to continue to support the small business during the remainder of the pandemic, and would you support a higher business tax?
So the first thing I'd highlight, as far as who's going to pay for the recovery, it needs to be those who've profiteered during the pandemic. And by and large, almost entirely, that's not small businesses, certainly not small businesses in Waterloo. So that's where the recovery costs need to come from. In terms of support, the NDP was instrumental in making sure that small businesses in Canada had access to a 75% wage subsidy as they needed it. Perhaps the Liberal candidate will call this bait as well. I just call it her record. The Liberals came forward with a plan for a 10% wage subsidy. It was the NDP that basically said, we need at least 75%. And there's businesses all through this community that wouldn't be in business today if not for the work that the NDP did on that. I'd also talk about, I'd also speak to the fact that support for people is support for small businesses. So when we're looking at something like Pharmacare, Just bringing in Pharmacare in Canada, on average, will save employers $600 a year per employee, right? That's real savings to businesses in this area. When we talk about things like CERB and supports to people, frankly, the Liberal government cut it off too soon. One of the reasons a lot of businesses that were closed during the pandemic are struggling to find workers now is because CERB was cut off before they could reopen. It's cut off for a lot of people, reduced for others, and those workers needed to go find work in other industries. And so when those industries that were closed reopened, their workers were working elsewhere. It's just an example of the government that we have not thinking through the consequences of their actions, cutting off support to people too soon, and in turn, that hurts businesses because businesses rely on people. That's just how these things work, and we can do better. We can do better than what's been done. Thanks, James.
Thank you. And Bardish, same question to you. What is your plan to continue to support small business during the remainder of the pandemic and beyond? And would you support a higher business tax?
So our platform has been fully costed and it is available for all Canadians to see. I encourage you to please go to liberal.ca. Not only will you be able to read what we have been able to accomplish together, you will be able to see the vision that we are proposing in this election, and we truly believe that Canadians should get to decide on that future. I want to take a minute and just give a shout out to the greater KW Chamber of Commerce for having worked so closely with all different levels of government, and the fact that they represented their members and their needs. And when we brought forward the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, it was for people who were not going to be able to stay on the payroll. But we wanted Canadians who are workers to be able to stay on the payroll. And that's why we brought forward the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. Yes, we did not always get it right, but we worked with anybody who is willing to work in a constructive way to deliver better outcomes for Canadians. That's my focus. I'm born and raised in the Waterloo region. I'm born Canadian. I chose to be a Liberal because it's a party in which I can actually deliver better outcomes for the citizens that I am elected to represent, and I'm so proud of. And that's why I say Canada needs more Waterloo. I would say that it's important that Canadians know that a re-elected Liberal government will extend the Canada Recovery Hiring Program to March 31st. Within the previous budget that we shared, I received a lot of phone calls in regards to will these measures to keep people on the payroll continue? And we had actually put a measure within there to make sure that they don't end in September if the pandemic continues, and that we actually do have the ability to ensure that some certainty is there. I want to give a quick shout out to our job creators, our small business owners, the people who are the backbone of our economy. And that's exactly one of the first things we did after conversations about modernizing our tax code. We lowered the small business tax to 9%. We lowered taxes for the middle class from 22% to 20.5%. In 2015, prior to us taking office, there was not that tax bracket for the wealthiest 1% of Canadians, and we brought in a 33% tax bracket as we committed to in our platform. There is a party that definitely voted against it, and that's where it's not about bait, it's actually about how do we get through this? Canadians are hurting. We have seen the inequities that exist within our society. This pandemic did not create them, but it sure has exposed them. And I, for one, want to help do something about it. And that's why I want to continue working with everyone to figure out how do we move our country forward for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Megan, what is your plan to continue to support small business during the remainder of the pandemic, and would you support a higher business tax?
Thank you for the question. Prior to the pandemic, Canadians had voiced their deep concern over the reckless and inefficient spending of our hard-earned tax dollars, and feeling that very little benefit was provided while the cost of living skyrocketed. The pandemic has exacerbated this, and now people are finding everyday life unaffordable and are afraid for their fiscal future. This includes businesses, which are the backbone of our economy. I received an email just yesterday from someone who owns a catering business who's really, really struggling, and saying that the supports are not targeted enough. Canada's Conservatives will help build the main streets of our community across Canada and give small businesses the support they need to get back on their feet. As a couple initiatives that I mentioned earlier provide a 25% tax credit on amounts up to $100,000 that Canadians personally invest in a small business over 2 years. We'll also launch the Main Street Business Loan to provide loans of up to $200,000. The $60,000 Canadian Emergency Business Account loan is too small for thousands of small and medium businesses. Canada's Conservatives will immediately offer a super CEBA loan of up to 4 months of pre-pandemic revenue, up to a maximum of $200,000. This qualification criteria and the terms will be similar to the CEBA. Up to 25% of this will be forgiven depending on the company's revenue loss. Our plan will also support small businesses by providing 25% wage subsidy to businesses for new hires. And to help those who have been unemployed long-term, our plan will cover up the cost of up to 50% of a salary for those who have been unemployed for 6 months or more. In terms of taxes, Canada has lost its competitive edge on taxation under this government, which is threatening our livelihoods and bleeding out business investment that we need to keep us employed. Our personal and business income tax rates are now well above the average of the OECD nations. And now they're talking about capital gains tax on the sale of your primary residence and taxing the financial sector. Taxing big banks to pay for big spending will just result in banks passing those costs on to consumers. Taxing the capital gains on primary home sales is an equally ineffective policy. Sellers will just build in the tax to their asking price, further driving up the cost of living. Canada's Conservatives have got us through a recession once. We will get us through this one.
Thank you. Next question, if there's no other points of discussion there. Do you support universal Pharmacare, and what is the estimated cost to the taxpayer? Jonathan, we'll start with you on that one.
Pardon me as I collect myself. There were some really terrible ideas for people in Waterloo in that last statement. Yes, I support Pharmacare. Absolutely, I do. Pharmacare is one of the most frustrating issues in Canadian politics to me, for the simple reason that we know that it would save Canadians money. The amount that we're paying now from employers and from paycheck deductions from Canadians in order for people to have drug coverage is more than a national Pharmacare program would cost. We can cover everybody, give everybody coverage on their prescription medications, and have it cost less than what we're paying today. It's truly amazing that this hasn't been done. I mean, it's been promised for decades. The Liberals first promised Pharmacare in 1997. And yet, even today, I mean, we're 6 years into a Liberal government where they could have delivered it for us, and they haven't. They voted against NDP motions to bring this about. And it seems to be disappearing from their plans. You know, in the 2019 budget, it wasn't perfect, but the Liberals had 5 pages on Pharmacare. It started on page 58 of their budget. In 2021, in their budget, Pharmacare took up half a page, and it started on page 238. In their platform for this election, it's 1 bullet point. It's not even its own section. And all it talks about is issues that either aren't Pharmacare or are incredibly local. The only action that they have to speak of when it comes to Pharmacare is a very, very recent, immediately before the election promise agreement with PEI, which all it's doing is filling holes that don't exist here in Ontario, don't exist in Waterloo. They're calling it a model for Pharmacare throughout Canada, but if their model is what they are agreeing to do in PEI, then they are not planning on delivering any changes on Pharmacare anywhere else in the country. And when you read their plan, that's exactly what's in it. Yes, I would deliver Pharmacare. Pharmacare is incredibly important. It's something Canadians deserve. It's something Canadians need, and the NDP is committed to it.
Thank you. Barter, same question. Do you support universal Pharmacare, and what is the estimated cost to the taxpayer?
So I would actually have to say that I did agree with some of the answer previously given, and I would just state some of what the federal government has been able to do. Today in Canada, unlike prior to our government being elected, we are bulk buying medications. What I'm hearing from our NDP candidate in Waterloo is that each province and territory who has both the right and responsibility to deliver healthcare, that there is different formularies across the country as to what is their coverage for. So we believe that by bulk buying, we can actually save Canadians money. And that's part of the work that we have started to do. We also believe that when it comes to rare diseases, not only do we need research, we need to ensure that the federal government plays a role in ensuring that supports are in place. We have already started to do that. I do believe that we have to work closely with provinces and territories, and we've actually had a really good relationship with provinces and territories when the pandemic hit. And they recognize that the federal government is not imposing on their jurisdictions. We just want better outcomes for all Canadians. And that's why the importance of collecting disaggregated data, making sure that we're actually bringing about a plan that we can deliver on. And that's where I would just say to the NDP candidate that what is the approach then to work with provinces and territories to ensure they all sign on? The landscape we had when we were elected is very different than the premiers we're having to work with today. And that's why we will continue to stay focused on Canadians and what they need. We will continue to stay focused on better health outcomes, including prevention. And that's why we continue to invest in a publicly funded healthcare system. That is a clear position. I have to say, James, really quickly, just to go to the Conservative candidates' points, I do believe that Canada needs more Waterloo. We are better than misinformation. Nowhere in our platform does it say that the Liberal Party or a Liberal government that is re-elected will increase taxes on capital gains for primary residents. That is so far from the truth. And actually yesterday, Justin Trudeau was on national news answering that question. And so I just want everyone to know, Canadians, that is not the intention, but we want to ensure housing affordability. We want to ensure that people who are purchasing houses and flipping them pay their fair share. We want to ensure that first-time homebuyers are able to actually purchase a home, live in that home, be part of our community and contribute in meaningful ways. And that's why I would actually say respectfully, out of all of the housing plans that are within our platform, the Liberal Party plan actually is the most comprehensive, and it builds upon our national housing strategy that was informed by people with lived experiences, including right here in the Waterloo region. It's an impressive plan that is actually delivering outcomes for people in Waterloo and across the country. But I just want to correct the record, because I would appreciate if we would all focus on the platform we are advancing rather than misleading in regards to other parties. Thank you.
Thank you. Megan, same question to you for Pharmacare. Do you support universal Pharmacare, and what is the estimated cost to the taxpayer?
Thank you. This pandemic's had tremendous impacts on our healthcare system, and I've met a lot of healthcare workers at the doors who've shared their struggles over the past year, and also people who have been on long wait lists due to the backlogs in hospital capacity. I do want to say that Canada's Conservatives are 100% committed to the principle of universal healthcare access, and it's shameful for other parties to mislead Canadians into thinking otherwise. I want to talk about what Canada's Conservatives will do for our healthcare system, which has three pillars. First would be increasing health transfers. Under an Erin O'Toole-led government, Canada will be able to count on stable, predictable health and social program funding. We will massively boost the health transfers to provinces by at least 6% annually, doubling the Liberal commitment and representing a nearly $60 billion more for healthcare over the next 10 years. We'll also focus on addressing the opioid crisis. An average of 17 Canadians a day die from opioid-related deaths. Since the onset of COVID-19, opioid-related deaths have almost doubled. Families across this country are mourning loss of their children, their families, their partners, and Canada's Conservatives will treat the opioid epidemic as the urgent crisis that it is. Our recovery plan will invest $325 million over the next 3 years to create 1,000 residential treatment beds and build 50 recovery community centers across the country. We'll make the single largest investment in Canadian history for mental health supports for Indigenous people, providing $1 billion over 5 years to boost funding for Indigenous mental health and drug treatment programs, including those that are culturally appropriate. We'll partner with the provinces to ensure that naloxone kits are free across Canada. And in terms of mental health, this pandemic has deepened the mental health crisis, particularly for youth. A Conservative government will work with the provinces to invest in mental health transfers. We will encourage employers to add mental health coverage to their employee benefit plans or boost their coverage by offering a tax credit of 25% of the cost of additional mental health coverage for the first 3 years. As someone who has worked
Megan, if you could finish our thought.
As someone who's worked with at-risk youth, I've seen firsthand the impacts of mental health and addiction, and I would make mental health, addiction, and health a priority if I was elected member of parliament for Waterloo.
Thank you. And Carla, same question. Do you support universal pharmacare, and what is the estimated cost to the taxpayer?
Yes, thanks for the question. So of course, we put health first, and pharmacare is part of health. Canada is the only industrial nation with universal healthcare that doesn't have publicly funded prescription drug coverage. We also, Canada pays the second highest rate among developed countries for pharmaceuticals. So when I see these numbers, I think there's a clear problem, and do we have a clear solution? I know Ms. Chagger mentioned that the intention was X, Y, and Z, but at the end of the day, Canadians don't care about intentions. Canadians care about results, right? Intentions might be meaning well, but at the end of the day, results are what matters. When we look at our healthcare system, we were able to come together and make a nonpartisan healthcare system. So I fully believe we're able to do that for pharmacare. When we talk about the pandemic, insurance and work benefits provide a lot of drug coverage and other health supports. But in the pandemic, for the folks who have lost their jobs, that means they've also lost their benefits. They've lost their insurance. And the folks who've lost their work are now left lost, and how are they going to pay for these things? When we look at things like insulin, if you live with diabetes, insulin is not covered. Drugs for MS are not covered. Cancer treatment drugs are not covered. And a national system would eliminate this. We need to make sure that folks who are living with chronic illnesses don't have to worry about, am I going to be able to afford these medications, or am I going to go without it? And these folks don't really have an option. Privatized prescription drug coverage, dental benefits, addiction prevention and rehabilitation programs don't need to be only accessible to the few who can afford it. Right now in Canada, we're seeing an increasingly growing gap between who can access certain programs in Canada and who can't. We essentially have a two-tier health system, right? We have a system where wealth opens the door to a full range of care, things like mental health access, things like if you are struggling with addiction, and especially in a time like the pandemic, people unfortunately are self-medicating. It's a really tough time to be, especially as a young person. People are unfortunately self-medicating, and not everyone has the luxury to access these programs. So we need to make sure that no one gets left behind, and health should not be a two-tiered system. Everyone should have access to health and proper health care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On to the next question. What are your ideas for addressing the housing crisis, ownership and rentals in Waterloo region? And we'll begin with Bardish Chagger on that one.
So I'll just start off by, I hope we get to talk more about healthcare later, because I want to have this exchange with this great group of people. But just on the question, I'll say that when we took office in 2015, part of what we committed to was actually the federal government coming back into the housing space. For far too long, the federal government had been offloading it onto provinces and territories, but we have a role to play. It was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was the Prime Minister at the time, who invested in cooperatives. And many of these communities are today mortgage-free. That money is now ensuring the maintenance and decency of these places. Every Canadian deserves a safe and affordable place to call home. And that's why we have a national housing strategy. The national housing strategy is today a $70 billion plus strategy over 10 years, which not only builds new, but actually restores and repairs where possible. The Waterloo region has benefited by being part of both of the tiers of the Rapid Housing Initiative, which means from the day funding is received and shovels are on the ground, units are available 12 months later. We have also brought in measures, and I really do hope people take the time to go check out our platform for rent to own. We have also committed to bringing in a program where people under the age of 40 years old are able to invest into an account so that they can use that money directly for a down payment. Right now, people can use, money against their RSPs, but they have to pay it back and they're taxed on it if they don't. And that does not help better outcomes. And so therefore, I would actually say the federal government's been a really good partner with the provincial governments across the country. And where that was not possible, we've started working directly with municipalities Clearly, there is a lot more to do, and that's exactly why I believe that we need to continue building upon the plan where today we have a federal government who has re-entered the housing space, is working with provinces and territories as well as municipalities to ensure that every Canadian has a place to call home. And that's where, if you go to a place to call, or to our national housing strategy, you will be able to actually see the details of it, including the outcomes we have achieved thus far, because we want to be held to account and we want to ensure that every Canadian has a safe and affordable place to call home.
Thank you. Megan, same question for addressing the housing crisis in Waterloo region.
Thanks. This is definitely a topic that comes up very often when I'm knocking on doors. A lot of families particularly concerned about their children being able to afford a home. Some of the residents in Waterloo I've spoken to have recently had children move out of the region because they can't afford to stay here, and that's very unfortunate. The rising cost of homes and housing crisis in general is something that definitely needs to be addressed. So the Conservative plan would implement a plan to build 1 million homes over the next 3 years. We would also review the extensive real estate portfolio of the federal government, the largest property owner in the country with over 37,000 buildings, and release at least 15% for homes. We would build more homes near publicly funded transit. We provide more Canadians with a path to home ownership by making it easier for families to get a mortgage. We would ban investors from buying homes here if they're not planning to move to Canada. We'd encourage foreign investment in affordable purpose-built rental housing for Canadians. We would stabilize the real estate market by increasing the number of homes being built and addressing the unfair and corrupt practices that have driven up prices, such as money laundering. And we would also address the cost of renting a home by partnering with municipalities to bring the private sector to bring in new rental units into the market. Finally, we are a strong believer in addressing the housing crisis of Indigenous communities, and we would implement a for Indigenous by Indigenous housing strategy in the spirit of reconciliation.
Thank you. And Carla, what are your ideas for addressing the housing crisis, ownership and rentals in Waterloo region?
So my party does have a handful of ideas. Fundamentally, it stems from the belief that we do think housing is a human right. I think everyone has the right to a home and, a place to sleep at night and be safe. We will appoint a minister of housing to strengthen the national housing strategy. We will increase the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, look for solutions in the private sector, and this can look like partnerships with companies to build affordable housing units and technologies that build houses at a reduced cost of traditional buildings. And we firmly believe that your house is a home. It's not just an investment. We need to strengthen regulations of foreign investments in residential and real estate, create the empty home tax for foreign and corporate residential property owners who leave these buildings vacant, prioritize funding for nonprofit and cooperative housing. And when we do talk about housing, I'm not sure any of the other parties really appreciate the breadth that you might be able to afford a house, but we need to realize that a lot of people, unfortunately, are, one wildfire, a flood, an economic downturn away from losing their home security. I think people don't appreciate the fact that things like forest fires aren't just happening in faraway lands. This isn't happening, in foreign nations or only in BC. This is happening in our own backyards. In just the year 2020, we had 592 forest fires in Ontario alone. This year, and the year's not even done yet, we've had so far 1,174 forest fires. So it might be great that you're able to afford a house and whatnot, but the reality is that the safety of our homes is also in jeopardy. What happens if a forest fire comes to your area? What will you do? You'll be left without a home. We can't talk about housing without talking about the environment. These things go hand in hand, and we need to address that with the plan that matches the scale of this crisis. Housing doesn't need to be a luxury that only a few people can afford. As somebody I'm 23 years old, and I would one day like to get into the housing market, and it does scare me. It scares me a lot to to realize that on top of the fact, students have student debt, we have things to pay for. How are we supposed to get in the housing real estate market? It seems increasingly impossible. So my party does have concrete plans to address that and support people who are current and prospective homeowners to make housing a reality for the folks here in Waterloo.
Thank you. And Jonathan, with the same question to you about housing.
Yeah, housing is a crisis that's been 30 years in the making. Right up to today, last 6 years, we've seen the cost to rent and the cost to buy spike dramatically. And so when we're talking about, the records of different parties who've been in government over the last 30 years, none of them have really succeeded in addressing this. The first thing that we would do as New Democrats is an emergency measure. The cost to rent for the average Canadian has gone up more than $4,000 in the last 6 years. And we have a plan where we would get help to those people, as much as $5,000, basically so that they can buy the things that the increase in rent has stopped them from being able to buy. That's an emergency measure. Frankly, that's a blunt tool. Like coming out of finance, I can say clearly that that is a blunt tool, but this emergency has developed to the point where that's what we need to do. We then need to increase supply. If 3 people are looking at a home, it doesn't matter how much extra money you give to them, how much access to money, anything like that, only one of them is going to get it. And that's whether they're buying it or renting it. So we need to increase supply, and we have a plan to do that. We're going to build 500,000 new quality, affordable homes. And unlike some of the plans that other parties have had now and in the past, those are all new units to supply. A lot of plans that have existed in the past have taken things like renovations on existing properties. You go in, you slap some new paint on it, and you pretend that that's a new unit. It's not. That doesn't help with supply. They've also backloaded their plans so that a promise made today won't even get started until after the next election. Our plan is to make sure that at least half of the units that we are promising are built in the next 5 years. Beyond that, we need to help with affordability. So more units will make things more affordable for people. We also have a plan where we want to increase the maximum length of mortgages for new home buyers without necessarily increasing the amount that they're borrowing. And what that will do is make sure that we are lowering the cost to own a home, letting people have lower monthly payments without just adding to the amount of debt that they're taking on when they purchase the home. So more supply, emergency measures to help people, and long-term plans to make things more affordable. That's what New Democrats would do.
Thank you. How can Waterloo Region assist on reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous residents? And Megan, we'll start with you on that question.
Thank you. I'm very pleased that we got to this question. It's a very important issue. As somebody, I've worked in Indigenous affairs provincially for the last 2 years. Some of the work that I've led, the very important work that I've led, is the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls file. This is an issue that deserves a great deal more attention. I've also seen the tragedy that's unfolded in many First Nation communities with opioid addiction, mental health, and suicides. Many Indigenous communities lack adequate housing and drinking water, problems that never seem to be at the forefront of the priorities. Communities like Muscantica should not be persistently without clean drinking water. I've also seen the amazing work that can be done by Indigenous communities. Many jobs are created through partnering with local mining and energy companies. The important work, for example, that Martin Falls and Webequay are doing on the environmental assessment for the road leading to the Ring of Fire, an area of mineral development, is very important, and the federal government needs to help fund these initiatives. The Conservative Party supports treaty rights and the process of reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous people. The Conservative government also created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as part of the 2007 Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, which recognized the Indian residential school system had a profoundly lasting and damaging impact on Indigenous culture, heritage, and language. Much intergenerational trauma has resulted from residential schools. A conservative government would be a reliable partner in addressing the housing needs of Indigenous communities, implementing a for Indigenous by Indigenous housing strategy. We would support innovative approaches to addressing the crisis of mental health challenges and addiction, such as land-based treatments development and developed and managed by Indigenous communities as part of this plan to deliver culturally appropriate addiction treatment and prevention services to First Nation communities in high needs. We would work collaboratively with Indigenous rights holders and commercial harvesters to develop management plans which fulfill the rights recognized in the Marshall decisions, protecting the sustainability of our fisheries and ensuring coastal communities can thrive. We provide $1 billion over 5 years to boost funding for Indigenous mental health and drug treatment programs. We will work with First Nations and other Indigenous groups to ensure they are partners in prosperity and the development of our natural resources by creating the Canadian Indigenous Enterprise Corporation. Finally, we would encourage Indigenous communities and resource development companies to work together to promote mutually beneficial conversations between Indigenous communities and resource project developers. We would provide $10 million per year to organizations that foster collaboration and encourage partnerships between the groups.
Thank you. Carla, same question. How can the Waterloo region assist in reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous residents?
Thank you, James, for the question. I think this is a very important question that has gone on for far too long. Canada has a profound legal and moral obligation to reconcile and provide restitutions for the colonial relations marked by violence, displacement, cultural and physical genocide, and forced assimilation. This has completely undermined the cultural, governance, and economic foundations of the Indigenous peoples of this land. And I just want to take a moment just to apologize to all the Indigenous people who time and time again do not get heard by any of the governments that have currently existed. Time and time again, our governments have never, ever done enough for Indigenous folks. And it's completely heartbreaking because this ultimately is their land. We all share this land, but it's ultimately their land. So I want to apologize that unfortunately our governments have not been doing enough for Indigenous folks. This being said, I truly admire the ongoing leadership and the resistance and the resilience of these Indigenous folks in the face of systemic oppression and intergenerational trauma. I will support the efforts of Indigenous folks to emerge from the position of disadvantage that colonization has left them in. I will support cultural revitalization and healing, support the development of Indigenous education curriculum that are language and cultural specific, revise and further the Truth and Reconciliation Act, support and sustain the transmission and regeneration of Indigenous cultural works and languages. We plan on educating non-Indigenous Canadians of the histories, the customs, the traditions, and the cultures of the First Nations, the Métis, the Inuit people of Turtle Island. We need to name the problem. This is systemic racism. We need to name it as it is. If we can't name it, we can't fix it. I believe Canada cannot reach its full potential as a nation until the socioeconomic gap between the Indigenous people and the rest of Canada is closed once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, how can Waterloo region assist on reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous peoples?
Yeah, thanks for making sure this topic was included in the debate here, James. Well, to begin, I'm going to talk about something that hasn't been mentioned by the other candidates, but I think that all of us would agree on, as we've sort of seen children found at residential schools this year, that we need to make sure we're committed to finding every child, and where the communities are asking for us to, making sure that those children are returned home. It's been a heart-wrenching reckoning in some ways this year. I know that nothing that was discovered this year was a surprise to Indigenous peoples and communities. They've been talked about this and known that this had happened for a long time. But still, there's been a, as I say, heart-wrenching reckoning. One of the best things about running as an NDP candidate is knowing how strong the representation from Indigenous people is within our party. We have a larger slate of Indigenous candidates than any other party. And one of the reasons that that is incredibly important and incredibly valuable is because discussions on this, decisions on this, need to be led by Indigenous voices. The role for someone like me is to support and to lift burdens and to amplify as things are being shared by Indigenous voices. And leading into that, when it comes to what we can do and what we should do, I mean, we have a report with 94 recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We need to do those things. We can't just talk about them. We actually need to make sure that those things get done. Same thing when we're looking at the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We've talked about it. It's been voted on in Parliament. You know, that this is something that we want to do, but we actually need to implement it. We actually need to follow through on these things. Waterloo Region is a leader in speaking to all kinds of issues throughout Canada. And this is one that when it comes to making sure that it's part of our conversation, it's part of our ongoing understanding and learning, this is something that, you know, Waterloo Region is going to need to be key in, just because we drive many of these discussions. As I say, like the place for someone like me is to amplify, to support, to lift burdens, and that's my commitment on this. Thanks, James.
Thank you. And Bardish, same question. How can Waterloo Region assist in reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous residents?
So I'm just going to start by acknowledging that I'm not Indigenous. My grandfather actually immigrated to the Waterloo Region in the early 70s and then brought the rest of the family here. I am a settler, and I have become very aware prior to even being elected, just the realities of Indigenous communities. So I do want to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, neutral people. And why I think it's important to acknowledge the land is because we have to know where we come from to know where we're going. As I said, born and raised in this community. My school system did not always teach me that, but I don't want to make excuses. I, as an individual, as an adult, should actually take more time to actually learn about our history, our true history. And that's why our government is committed to a true nation-to-nation relationship with meaningful two-way dialogue. As part of our platform, we have shared that we will confront the legacy of residential schools. We will take action to confront systemic racism against Indigenous peoples, especially in the justice system and healthcare. Launch an Indigenous urban, rural, and northern housing strategy, and protect the well-being of Indigenous children and families. And I just want to share that every day in Canada, Indigenous children are being separated from their communities, their languages, and their cultures. And that's why we actually advanced Bill C-92, an act respecting First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children, youth, and families. This legislation was co-developed with Indigenous, provincial, and territorial partners to put in place a law that was Indigenous-led to give Indigenous kids back to their communities. So we have a lot of work to do. This is a bill that I actually, as government House Leader, passed time allocation on. We did not receive any support from other parties, which was unfortunate, but we did. We were able to use our majority to take action. A year later, by working with Indigenous partners and governments, we were able to actually announce the first agreement through COWASIS to give nations to give their kids back. Bill C-12, which is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it was brought forward as a private member's bill by NDP MP Romeo Sagnash. We were not able to get it to the Senate. I will always give credit where it's due. We committed to bringing that in as government legislation. We were able to get it through the House and the Senate. Unfortunately, it was the Conservative Party that voted against it, and we could have seen it voted on a lot sooner, but that might just be the reality of some of our systems. I really do want you to know, when it comes to lifting water boil advisories, we refuse to take the Ottawa knows best approach or the Government of Canada telling Indigenous communities how to self-govern and operate. And that's why we will continue to have meaningful dialogue, Indigenous-led, in the way to proceed. Through the investments we've made, we've actually prevented 188 drinking water advisories from being put into place by actually not only empowering, but enabling Indigenous communities to make their own decisions. I will continue on the path to reconciliation. When it comes to the TRC recommendations, you can see it's publicly available. 80% of them have been delivered on or on way, but we refuse once again to take the Ottawa knows best approach that has not worked in our history, because we do believe that we need to work as partners with Indigenous communities. And I would just say 2 ears, 1 mouth, where a federal government actually listens twice as much as they speak. And I do believe in that relationship, and I will remain committed to it.
Thank you. What measures do you propose to assist local technology companies? And Carla, we'll begin with you on this point.
Thanks for the question. So when we look at Waterloo, we are an extremely educated city. We have Wilfrid Laurier University, and we have the University of Waterloo, and a handful of colleges. As a student of Wilfrid Laurier, I do appreciate the fact that, you know, students do contribute a lot to research. In terms of solid actionable measure, currently we have the National Science and Engineering Research Council of Canada, which it currently announced a new national strategy for research partnerships on July 12th of this year. And the primary goal with that is to protect Canadian research and science. With this being said, though, there is some red tape with that. Some international students aren't able to participate to the same capacity. I really do believe that when we all work together, we can bring forth the best, and we need to include our international students. And we have the opportunity of a lifetime to, you know, invest in these new technologies and invest in research. We have these amazing schools and an amazing workforce of students, so we need to take advantage of that. We also need to incentivize these developments of green technology as well. I think that's the direction that the world is moving in, and that's, you know, without doubt. So we can either choose to be followers or we can choose to be leaders. I firmly believe that Canadians are all leaders by heart, and we need to remember that. We need to, you know, pave the road forward. We currently in the KW region, we have Sustainability Region Waterloo. It's the first ever green economy hub created by, I believe it was Mike Morris. We have Green Economy Canada. We have the Heartwood Institute, which was funded by the Greens. It's a political think tank that supports green politics. In terms of skill training in new technologies, we can index graduate funding and scholarships that keep up with inflation. For instance, if you're a master's or doctorate student in Canada and you received a scholarship for master's students, it's $17,500. For a graduate student, it's $35,000. This number is the same from 2004. So this number does not keep up with inflation. This number does not keep up with the cost of living. So increasing funds for that, increasing funding for the Canadian training benefit, which allows individuals to help pay for training costs, including having their courses paid for if they're looking to get micro credentials. At the moment, that access to that funding is $250 per year. That sounds like pocket change, and that's not enough. $250 in 2021 in Waterloo does not get you very far in the educational world. So just investing in our students and investing in our population, because we really do have a huge educated population, and we would be remiss to not take advantage of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jonathan, what measures do you propose to assist local technology companies?
Yeah, so when I talk to local technology leaders, I hear about things like education. Education is huge. Making sure that we have people educated and trained to work in those industries is something that we need to make sure we're on top of. And we need to make sure that people aren't chased out of pursuing that because of the cost of education. So when we look at things like the amount of student debt that people have to take on to go to school and things like that, we have a plan to help people. We have a plan to make sure that when people come through school, educated, trained, that they're not being held back by a mountain of debt. Our plan would forgive about 20% of all student debt in Canada in its first year, and it will continue to help people in need after that, move on to student grants instead of student debt, and eventually make post-secondary public education, because it's a public good, just like high school or elementary school. That's where we want to get to. Beyond that, there's some major infrastructure challenges in Waterloo. So we know that we need all-day, two-way go. That's something that would connect Waterloo to nearby regions and help local businesses incredibly. We know that Waterloo should be a world leader in all kinds of things. We're already a world leader in technology, and that positions us to do things like we could create some of the greatest health science centers and research centers in Canada by forging relationships between the technology industry we have and the health sector. Same thing with green energy, same thing with infrastructure. I mean, these are things that we can do. And this is the support that local industry needs to grow. And then beyond that, it's going back to much of what we talked about. Waterloo needs to be an affordable place to live. We need to get the housing crisis solved. We need to help people with their medical bills. We need to make sure that people are able to live and survive and to thrive here. And that's what's needed to support our tech industry.
Thank you. Bartosz, same question to you. What measures do you propose to assist local technology companies?
So I actually just want to, I'm actually really proud of our record as a Liberal government. And I just want to share that since 2015, we brought in the country's first ever innovation and skills plan. We introduced the first ever national intellectual property strategy. We invested more in clean tech and med tech than any other government in Canada's history. We created a strategic innovation fund and net zero accelerator to spur innovation and accelerate growth in Canada's business. We attracted highly skilled global talent through the global skills strategy, and we introduced that. So I have to give a shout out to local tech companies and leaders, including Communitech and the Chamber, for actually helping the government be able to bring in talent that was needed even faster. So we know that the spirit of innovation requires more than just tax cuts. It requires a belief in science, ambitious partnerships between government, academia, and the private sector, and a plan to invest in the freshest, most innovative ideas out there. I always say the best natural renewable resource in Waterloo, it's our people, it's our brain economy. People from across the country and around the world choose us not only for our institutions, but actually the way we advance. And that's why the federal government has invested in modernizing labs. Each of the 3 post-secondary institutions have had massive investments from your tax dollars because we believe in the future. And just one I can say is that we are committed to reforming the scientific research and experimental development program to reduce red tape and actually modernize it for its purpose today and to make it easier to use. And personally, I graduated from the University of Waterloo in 2004. When I graduated, not only did I have 6 months of payment relief, I had interest accumulating the day after I graduated. Part of our platform actually builds upon removing interest to ensure that graduates actually are able to have a more successful future. And that's why we have increased grants, diminished to zero interest to ensure better prosperity for all. Thank you.
Thank you. And Megan, same question. What measures do you propose to assist local technology companies?
Thank you for the question. Waterloo has one of the world's most talented workforces. We have so many great advantages here in our region, and it's a fantastic place to launch and grow innovative products and businesses, particularly in our tech sector. Unfortunately, far too often, Canadian innovators are run into barriers. Instead of scaling their businesses in Canada and creating jobs, they're pushed to move to the US or elsewhere to build their businesses. A conservative plan would look to position Canada as a world leader in technology and end the innovation drain. We would do so by incentivizing Canadian companies to develop their products here by cutting the income tax rate in half for newly patented technologies developed here in Canada. Conservatives will establish the Canadian Advanced Research Agency to fund major cutting-edge technological advances such as carbon capture and storage, hydrogen fuel, small modular reactors, electric vehicle development, and pharmaceutical research and production. And we'll also make it more attractive to invest in small tech startups by introducing the use of flow-through shares, which is based on the model that Canada has as a world leader in mining finance.
Thank you. We're getting fairly close to the end of the forum, so we'll proceed with closing remarks from candidates. So candidates will provide 1-minute closing remarks in reverse order from opening remarks. So Carla will speak first, followed by Megan, Bardish, and Jonathan.
Ooh, sorry about that. I think I had myself muted for a second. I want to thank the KW Chamber of Commerce for hosting this wonderful event, and I'd like to thank my fellow candidates who were able to make time in their busy schedules, and everyone who was able to attend in the audience. Based on the points that I've made, I hope that it's been clear. I've been able to bring the message across that I want to bring back honesty and integrity to Ottawa. Too often we have politicians who kind of get caught up in what it is to be a politician. And I want to be a voice for the community that is a real voice, a voice that is an advocate, a voice that is an activist first. For myself, this has been, obviously I have not lived perhaps as long as some of my other competitors, but I hope to use that as my strength, that I can connect with the youth of Canada. And it's a huge population, you know, eventually we will be inheriting this earth, and it's something that I hope to make a priority of mine. This has been a passion of mine from a very long age. I remember attending my first protest when I was 10 years old. I remember I had created my first green initiative when I was 10 years old as well. Even today, I just went to a climate action protest, and I was actually the only the Green Party was the only party that was there. So if anything, I hope that my voice can come across as just an honest voice that actually wants to get involved on a community level. And I really do believe that when we talk about governance, I think authority should be derived from the willingness and the consent of the people, and it should not be derived from threat or force. You know, we need to empower Canadians to make educated choices. And I hope that that's something that resonated with everyone here. And I hope that you can trust me to be, trust in me to be that voice for the folks here in Waterloo. Thank you so much. And I'm the Green Party candidate.
Thanks, Carla. Megan, we'll go to you for closing remarks.
First, I just want to say that I'm really disappointed that that environment and climate change wasn't a topic of this debate. The Conservative Party has a very strong climate and environment plan, and I encourage everybody to check it out on our website. As someone who has a background in the environment, I'm just disappointed we didn't get to talk about it. However, it was a pleasure to be here today, and it was a pleasure to be here with all of the candidates, and I thank you for the healthy discussion and conversation. To the residents of Waterloo, I would say if you're worried about more debt, more unemployment, and more of the same, there is only one choice, and that's the Conservatives. The Conservative Party released their platform well ahead of this election to show Canadians that we are a party with a serious plan on how to move forward as a country. Our plan is to secure jobs, restore accountability to government, tackle the growing mental health and addictions crisis, secure the countries who are not left unprepared for future crises, and get the economy back on track. The Conservative Party led us through the Great Recession, and we were ready to lead again. And finally, to the residents of Waterloo, I have thoroughly enjoyed getting to know you and meeting you at your doors. Thank you for sharing your struggles, your concerns, and your stories with me. I know now more than ever why I want to be in public service. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bardish, we'll go to you for closing remarks.
Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this debate. I think you can all see clearly the choices you need to consider. This election is about Canadians choosing the vision for the future of our country that you support. The Liberal Party has put forward a plan, a fully costed plan that builds on the work that we have been doing together. It's a plan for our economy, a plan for our environment, for families and children. It's a plan for fairness, equity, and reconciliation. Our platform includes the progress we have made, and it echoes your feedback as to how we can continue to build an even better and consciously more inclusive Canada. I've had the honor and privilege of serving as your member of parliament, and I still have the fight in me to do even more for our community and country. I often say, as much as the world needs more Canada, Canada needs more Waterloo. I appreciate the exchange we have had today and you for taking the time to engage. I want to thank the organizers and the team who brought us together. Every vote matters. I ask for your support. I hope I have provided you with reasons to vote for me, Bardish Chagar, so that together we can keep moving forward for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jonathan, we'll end with your closing remarks.
Thanks. So first, I'd like to thank the other candidates. I'd like to thank the KW Greater Chamber of Commerce for hosting, and for everyone watching, thank you too. I think I want to leave everyone here today with a question, which is, what is this election about? For some people, I know it's an election of credibility, of hearing similar promises, similar commitments from different people, and asking the question, who will deliver them? Who's had the opportunity to deliver them and hasn't? I think for other people, it's a question of, why was this election called in the first place? Any party that wants to work together on issues that are important to Waterloo, I think, had partners in Parliament to do that. The only reason to call this election really was because one party wanted a majority. And there was something said earlier by the Liberal candidate when we were talking about wage subsidies, and they admitted that they didn't always get things right, that their plan wasn't as good as the one that the NDP brought back. And I find it incredibly arrogant to come back after saying something like that and running an election where the point from the party's point of view is to get a majority and cut out the input from other parties that was required in the last couple of years to get things like that right. When it comes to things like electoral reform, we have a government that's broken promises. When it comes to Pharmacare, affordable housing, and student debt relief, we need people who don't just want to study them and then trot out the same promises next election. We need people who want to deliver on these things. These things are important to me, and I won't back down. And that's why, if these things are important to you and your family and your friends, I would ask that on September 20th or sooner at advanced polling, you vote for me, Jonathan Castles. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the Chamber and Rogers, I'd just like to thank all candidates for taking the time out of their busy schedules to participate in this forum. Also, if you're a resident of Waterloo, the election date is rapidly approaching, so please ensure you're aware of your voting location. The Chamber and Rogers hope this forum has provided some relevant information and perspectives on your issues of concern. Thank you so much and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, James.